Hello and welcome to the next edition of the BriefingsDirect Voice of the Innovator podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on the latest insights into hybrid cloud strategies. While many businesses recognize that there's a hybrid cloud future, far fewer are adopting a hybrid cloud approach with an overabundance of due diligence, governance, and cost optimization, at least not yet. Unlike the often ad hoc adoption of public cloud services by various groups across an enterprise, getting the right mix and operational coordination required of true hybrid cloud cannot be successful if it's not well managed. Stay with us now as we examine the innovation maturing around hybrid cloud models and operations, and how proper common management of hybrid cloud from start to finish can make or break the realization of its promised returns. Here to help us learn more about safeguarding successful hybrid cloud deployment and operations is Erik Vogel, Global Vice President of Hybrid IT and Cloud at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Welcome, Erik.
Well, thank you, Dana.
Erik, let's dive into a little bit about why businesses are getting stuck. It seems to me that the cloud was very attractive. People jumped into it. But like many things, there's unintended consequences. What's driving cloud and hybrid cloud in particular now? Or maybe we should say what's undriving it? What's holding people up?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. So what we're seeing is that the enterprises, and I'll say all enterprises, are hybrid at this point. Now, whether they know it or not, or have accepted that realization really depends on the client we deal with. But pretty much all of them are hybrid in that they're all using a combination of on-prem solutions, public cloud solutions, SaaS solutions. They've brought all of that into the enterprise. So all of that is there. And there's very few enterprises we talk to that don't have some mix. But when we ask them and talk to them about how they've gotten there, most of them have done it in an ad hoc fashion. So most of them have had developers who have gone out to one or multiple hyperscalers, had business units who have gone out and started to consume SaaS solutions, or IT organizations that are responding to that by building their own on-prem solutions, whether that's an open private cloud or an Azure Stack type of environment. So they've done it in kind of pockets within their organization. And I think what they're seeing now is the challenge of how do we start to manage and operate this in a consistent, common fashion. A lot of different solutions, a lot of different technologies, but everyone with its own operating model, its own consoles, its own rules. And that is, I think, where we see our clients struggling, is that they don't have that holistic strategy or holistic approach to hybrid, but rather they've done it in this bespoke or ad hoc fashion. And now what they're realizing is that they're going to have to take a step back. They're going to have to think this through and decide what is the right approach. How do we enforce common governance, common management, common operating principles, so that we're not running this as 5, 6, 8, or even 10 different operating models, but rather how do we get back to where we started, which was a common operating model across the entire IT estate.
Now, IT has traditionally over the years had these waves of adoption that led to heterogeneity, that created complexity that then had to be managed. And is this different when we think about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud? Is it different from the Unix wars? Is it different from distributed computing and N-tier computing? If so, how is it different? Why is cloud a more difficult heterogeneity problem to solve than the previous ones?
Yeah, I think it's a little more challenging. It's funny, we typically refer to that old model, what we used to see in the data center, as the Noah's Ark data center, where you would typically walk into a data center and you'd see two of everything, two of every vendor's everything within the data center. And it was about 10, maybe 12, 15 years ago where we really started to make a push to consolidate all of that into common infrastructures, common platforms, to reduce the operational complexity. And there was really an effort to reduce TCO within the data center, to reduce that Noah's Ark data center into very, very common standardized elements. What we've seen now is that pendulum start to swing back, and I think it's actually becoming more of a challenge because it's now so easy to consume non-standard or kind of heterogeneous solutions. Before, everything was within the data center, so there was still that gatekeeper. Somebody had to make a decision that a certain piece of infrastructure or a certain component would be deployed within the data center. Now we can have developers go out and consume with just a swipe of a credit card, any of the 3 or 4, depending on how you look at it, hyperscaler solutions, literally thousands of SaaS solutions. If you just look at the Salesforce.com platform, all the different options that surround that, So all of a sudden, we kind of lost that gatekeeper, and now we're seeing that sprawl, that shift towards more heterogeneous solutions occurring much faster than what we saw 10 or 15 years ago as we started to move away from that Noah's Ark data center. So I would say that what we're seeing now is definitely a pendulum shift back towards consuming lots of different solutions, lots of different capabilities and services within the market. And we're seeing it moving much faster than it did before because of that loss of friction or that loss of a gatekeeper.
And I suppose one thing that's different, too, is that we're talking mostly about services. We're consuming things as services, and we're acquiring them not as a capital expenditure that has a 3 to 5 year cycle of renewal. We're looking at this on a on-demand consumption basis as you use it. So I suppose that makes it a bit more complicated, but I'm thinking that it also makes it perhaps a problem that can be solved better. So is there something about the nature of a all-services, hybrid, and multi-cloud environment, as well as the fact that you're going to be able to economically go at this on an operations budget basis that makes it a bit more solvable?
Yeah, absolutely. And the economics are definitely playing into this. In fact, if you kind of look at the direction, I have this vision that probably within the next 5 years, we'll no longer call it as a service because it will be the norm. It will be the standard. And we'll only refer to things that are not as a service because we are seeing this push towards everything being consumed as a service. And it's as an industry, we're definitely moving in that direction. From an operating standpoint, the idea of being able to use and consume and pay for only what we use is very, very attractive. Again, if you look back 10 or 15 years ago, typically within a data center, we'd be buying for a 3 or 4 year lifespan. So that forced us to make predictions as to what type of load or what type of demand we'd be placing on the capital expense that we were creating. And what would happen is we'd always overestimate. And if you look at utilization of CPU, of disk, of memory, always 20, 25%, very low utilization, especially pre-virtualization. So what we would do is we'd end up overbuying, but we'd still pay the full load for all of that. We'd still have to pay full maintenance and support. And we had very little, if any, ability to sort of dial that up and dial that down. And I think it's that economic capability of really being able to consume everything as a service now, even things you wouldn't think of as a service, like buying a server, for example, or compute as a service within the data center. That is definitely changing the game. And our enterprise customers are really taking notice of that because it gives them the ability to flex the expenditures as their business cycles up and down. Very rarely do we see enterprises with very constant demand for that compute capacity or that service that they're providing. So it's very nice for them to be able to flex that up and down, adjust the normal seasonal effects within a business and be able to flex that operating expense now as their business fluctuates up and down. And that is really, I think, a key driver of moving everything to this as a service model, giving them that flexibility that even just a few years ago we did not have.
All right, so the good news is that these are services and we can manage them as services. The bad news is there are services coming from different providers with different economic models and with different APIs and to a certain degree different SKU definitions and management definitions that are very unique to their own organization. So how do we take advantage of the fact that it's all services but conquer the fact that it's from different organizations speaking in effect different languages?
And this is, I think you're hitting to the heart of the challenge in terms of managing a hybrid environment. If you think about how applications are becoming more and more composable now, and that they're built with various different pieces, different services, maybe on-prem solutions. One of the examples I always like to use is one of our clients has built basically an application for their sales teams that provides real-time client data and client analytics before a seller will go in and talk to a customer. And when you look at the complexity of that application, they're using Salesforce.com. They have an on-prem database, customer database. They're getting point-of-sale solutions from another SaaS provider that's providing point-of-sale information. They have some analytics engines they're getting from one of the hyperscalers. And all of this is coming together to drive a mobile app that presents all of this information seamlessly to their end user or to their seller in real time so they can be better armed and have more information when they go meet with their end customer. And as we start looking at how these new applications or these services, don't want to really even call them applications, they're more services built on multiple applications, they are crossing across multiple service providers, multiple SaaS providers, multiple hyperscalers, consuming services across a very broad reach. And as you start to look at how we interface with those, how we connect with those, how we pass data, exchange information across these different service providers, you're absolutely right. The taxonomies are different. The APIs are different. The interfaces and operations challenges are different. So when that seller goes to make that call and they bring up their iPad app and all of a sudden there's no data, or it hasn't been refreshed in 3 months, who do you call? How do you start to troubleshoot that? How do you start to determine, well, is it a Salesforce problem? Is it a database problem? Is it a third-party service provider problem? Maybe it's my encrypted connection I had to install between Salesforce and my on-prem solution. Maybe it's the mobile app. Maybe it's a setting on the iPad itself. So it's starting to add all of that complexity is really what's building that problem, and that we don't have consistent APIs, consistent taxonomies, even the way we look at billing and the underlying component for billing and how we sort of break that out, it varies greatly between service providers. So this is where, as we start to really understand the complexity of hybrid IT, I think you're hitting right on it, where you have all of these different service providers all kind of working and operating independently, and yet we're trying to bring them together to provide end customer services. And it's that composing of those different services together, I think, that is really providing or creating one of the biggest challenges we have today within hybrid.
And even if we can solve the challenge on the functional level of getting the apps and services to behave as we want, it seems like it's as much or more a nightmare for the chief financial officer to try to determine whether you're getting a good deal or whether you're buying redundancy across different cloud providers or too much from one and not from another. I mean, a lot of times in procurement in an enterprise, you'll say, wow, we're buying a lot from one vendor. Let's go in and cut a deal on volume. But how do you do that if you don't know what you're buying from whom? So how do we address this, not just through the functional ability to use these cloud services in some coordinated common management framework, but to pay for them with the least amount of waste?
Yeah, I tell you, that is probably one of the most difficult jobs within IT today, is really driving the finance side of it, because there is a lot of, let's say challenges. There are a lot of challenges in terms of how do we put that bill together, and what does that bill really look like, and not just at an individual component level. So I can see what I'm paying with from Amazon Web Services, or I can see what my Azure stack is costing me. But how do we aggregate that to say, what does it cost to provide a service? And this has been a challenge for IT forever, in that it's always been difficult to sort of slice it by service. We knew what compute costs, we knew what network costs and storage costs were, but it was always difficult to make that vertical slice across the budget to say, this is what it really costs us to provide a service. So how much of each one of those elements comes together to provide a specific service on a per user basis. And now we've made that problem worse, because we have all these different bills that are coming in from all of these different service providers. So the procurement, the challenge, I think, is even more acute than it has been, because now we have all these different service providers. How do we know what we're really paying? And we're seeing this too, especially on, for example, with clients that have done a lot of AWS development work, where they've allowed developers to go out and swipe credit cards, where maybe they don't even see the bill itself. They don't actually see a true accounting of what's being spent across the public cloud, because it's being masked as almost shadow IT spend, because it's coming through as a credit card expense and not really directed to IT. So there's definitely this need to kind of get our hands around all of these different expenses and where we're spending money, and really think differently about our procurement models and how we're procuring these services. I know in the past we've talked about this almost as brokerage. And I've always made the comment that it's actually a lot more than that. It's more strategic sourcing. So if you think about procurement models for cloud and hyper-cloud related services, it's really about a strategic sourcing model that becomes most important. It's less about brokerage and looking for that low-cost provider and trying to reduce the spend 10 points here and there, but rather, how do we think about it strategically in a strategic sourcing model? Are we getting the SLAs we're paying for? Are we getting the services that we're paying for? Are we getting the uptime we're paying for? So the model really, our procurement models, especially within IT, have to change to really address that problem of how do we really know what we're paying for, and are we getting the value, strategic value, out of the expenses within hybrid that we had expected?
Well, it seems to me in business over the years, when you've got a challenge, you can try to do it yourself. You can often employ more intelligence technologies to try to tackle complexity. But another way of doing this is to look at it through the lens of, is there a third party that knows this business better than I do, that has a better relationship with those cloud providers than I do, especially if I'm a small to medium-sized business? Should I look at a consumption model that has somebody else going out and doing the due diligence for me so that then they pass the savings on? So are we starting to see an ecosystem develop where the consumption model for cloud services is managed more centrally, and then those services are repurposed or on a tertiary basis resold to the actual consumer business?
Yeah, we're definitely starting to see that. There's a lot of that is being developed to help customers in terms of consuming and buying these services and being smarter about it. I always joke that the cheapest thing you can buy is somebody else's experience. And that is absolutely the case when it comes to hybrid cloud and all of these different service providers that are out there. But the reality is no enterprise can have expertise in all three of the hyperscalers, in all of the hundreds of SaaS providers, of all of the on-prem solutions that are out there. It just doesn't exist. And you just can't do it all. So it really becomes important to start looking for people who can aggregate this capability and start bringing the collective experience back to you. And if you look at the ability to reduce the overspend or to make smarter purchasing or buying decisions, to prevent things like lock-in, to reduce the risk of buying these third-party services, there's a tremendous value being created by these firms that are actually jumping into that model and helping clients address these challenges of having to go out and buy from all of these different providers and providing that expertise, that been there and done that expertise. So firms that have actually gone out and consumed and purchased within, the hyperscalers, who have run workloads within those environments and who can really help predict what the true cost should be, and more importantly, maintain that optimization going forward. It's not just about anymore just going and buying and making a buying decision, say, okay, we're going to move this workload to Azure, for example, but there's an ongoing optimization that has to occur, ongoing cost optimization where we're continuously evaluating, is that the right decision? We're finding that the calculus changes over time. So while it might have made a lot of sense to put that on-prem today, based on the demand for that application, based on pricing changes, it may make more sense to move that off-prem tomorrow. And then there may come a point in the future where, hey, it may make sense to bring that back on-prem for a variety of reasons. So you have to constantly be evaluating that. And I think that's where a lot of the firms that are really playing in the space now can add a lot of value, is helping with that ongoing optimization, making sure that we're always making that smart decision. It's a very dynamic ecosystem, and the calculus, the metrics are constantly changing, and we have the ability to constantly reevaluate. That's the beauty of cloud, is the ability to flex between these different providers.
So, Erik, for those organizations interested in getting a better handle on this, are there any practical approaches that are available now?
Yeah, so we do have, and I mentioned this earlier, our tool, which we call RightMix Advisor, which is our ability to go in and assess very large application portfolios. And the nice thing is it scales up and down very nicely. It is delivered in a service model. And be able to go in and assess that set of applications against those variables that I mentioned and the weighting factors, and come up with a concrete list of recommendations as to what should our clients do right now. In fact, what we like to talk about is, it's not about the 1,000 things they could do, but what are those 10 or 20 things they should start on tomorrow morning that are most impactful for their business. And that really is what RightMix Advisor, what that tool and that expert system are built to accomplish. It's really to help identify those things that matter the most for the business right now and give that tactical plan to say, this is what we should start on. And I'll tell you, it's not just the tool. We also bring our expertise, whether that's from our cloud technology partners, our CTP acquisition, or Red Pixie, or our existing HPE or kind of legacy business where we've done this for years and years. We bring that expertise as well. So it's not just the tool, but also our experts looking at that data, helping to refine that data, and really coming up with that smart list that really makes sense for our clients to get started on right now. And of course, once they've accomplished those things, we can come back and look at it again and say, here's your next list. Here's the next 10 or 20 things. And that's really how RightMix Advisor was designed to work. And that's something that our clients can leverage today and they can start using today.
And it seems to me there'd be a huge advantage if you were able to get enough data about what's going on at the market level, that is to say aggregate. How are these cloud providers selling? How are they changing? And then how is the consumption patterns going about? So if you were in a position where you could gather all the data about what's happening among and between the cloud providers, the enterprise consumption, you'd have a much better bead on how to procure properly, manage properly, and optimize. So is such a data well developing? Is there anyone in the right position to be able to gather the data and then start applying such things as machine learning technologies to come up with even some predictions about what the best course of action for a hybrid cloud environment or hybrid IT environment?
Yeah, and in fact, we've started down that path. So we have tackled it by developing what is really an expert system, which is a kind of a set of logic rules that can help make those decisions. We did it by combining a couple of fairly large data sets that we've developed over the last decade and a half, primarily with HPE's history of doing a lot of application work, application migration work, really understanding, especially on the on-prem side, where applications should reside based on how they're architected, what the requirements are, what type of performance needs to be derived from that application. We combine that with another data set, actually a couple that we acquired through a couple of our recent cloud acquisitions. We acquired CTP and Red Pixie, for example, that brought us a huge wealth of information where they've done a tremendous number of application migrations to the public cloud. And we were able to bring and combine those data sets together and develop this expert system that allows us to make those decisions pretty quickly as to where applications should reside based on a number of factors. And right now we look at about 60 different variables. But what's really important when we do that is to really understand from a client's perspective what matters. And this is where I go back to that strategic sourcing discussion. It's easy to go in and assume that every client wants to reduce cost. And while I will tell you every client does want to do that, no one would ever say no to that. But usually that's not the most important thing. Clients are worried about performance. They really want to drive agility, faster time to market. To them, that is more important than the amount they will save from a cost reduction perspective. So when we run our expert system, the first thing we do is we go in and weight the variables based on what's important to that client aligned to their strategy. And this is where it gets challenging for any enterprise who's making these smart decisions. And that's why I call it strategic sourcing, is you have to understand strategically what's important to your business as you make these intelligent decisions about where workloads should go across the hybrid IT options that you have. So we run an expert system to help make those decisions. Now, as we collect more data, this will move towards more AI. I'm sure everybody's aware AI requires a lot of data. Since we're still early, really in the very early stages of true hybrid cloud and hybrid IT, we don't have a massive enough data set yet to really start to make these decisions in a truly automated or learning type of model. So we've started with an expert system to help us do that, to start moving down that path. But very quickly, we are learning, and we're building those learnings into our models that we use to make those decisions. So yes, there's a lot of value in people who have been there and done that, and being able to bring that data together in a unified fashion. And that's exactly what we've done to help our clients, because these decisions can't take a year to figure out. You've got to be able to make these decisions quickly because, again, like I said earlier, it's a very dynamic model. A lot of things are changing. They're constantly changing. You have to keep loading the models with the latest and greatest data, so you're always making the best, smartest decision and always optimizing the environment.
As I listen to this problem unfold, it strikes me that not that long ago, innovation in a data center was about speeds and feeds, and you'd innovate on technology and pass along those fruits to your consumers. But now we have to innovate on economics, management, understanding procurement, indirect and direct procurement models. We have to innovate around intelligence technologies and artificial intelligence. We have to innovate around making the right choice, not just on cost, but on operations benefits like speed and agility. So tell me, Erik, how do you view innovation, and how has innovation changed such that it used to be a technology innovation, but now it's really across so many multiple different dynamic principles of business?
It's a really interesting observation you're making, and that's exactly what's happening. You're right. Even as recently as 5 years ago, we always talked about speeds and feeds, trying to squeeze a little more out of every processor, trying to enhance the speed of the memory or the storage devices. But now, as we've pivoted towards more of a service mentality, nobody asks when you buy from a hyperscaler, if you're going to Google Cloud, for example, you don't ask Google what chips they're running or what chip speeds they're set at or how fast does this spin. That's really not relevant in in an as-a-service world. So the innovation then is really around the service sets, the economic models, the pricing models. That's really where innovation is being driven. And as a company ourselves, we've kind of moved in that direction as well, where we provide through our GreenLake offer a flex cap model where clients can really buy capacity on demand. And it becomes really about buying that capacity, that compute capacity. How we provide that, what speeds and feeds we're providing that at becomes less and less important, but more it's the innovation around the economic model that our clients are looking for. And I think we're only going to continue to see that type of innovation going forward, where it's less about the underlying components, because in reality, if you're buying the service, you don't really care sort of what chips and what feeds are being provided on the back end, as long as you're getting the service you've asked for with the SLA, the uptime, the reliability, and the capability you need. All of that sits behind it becomes less and less important. And I always like to tell people, think about how you buy electricity. You just expect 110 volts at 60 hertz coming out of the wall, and you expect it to be on all the time, and you expect it to be consistent and reliably and safely delivered to you. How it gets generated, where it gets generated, whether it's a wind turbine, a coal burning plant, a nuclear plant, that's really not important to you. Where it gets, if it's produced in one state and transferred to another over the grid, if it's produced in your local state, it becomes less and less important. What really matters, though, is that you're getting provided that consistent, reliable service that you can count on. And we're seeing the same thing within IT as we move to that service. The speeds and feeds, the infrastructure becomes less important, and all of the innovation now is being driven around the as-a-service motion. And what does it take to provide that service? And how do we innovate at the service level and provide that innovative service, whether that's for flex capacity or management services, but providing the true as-a-service capability.
So while organizations like Hewlett-Packard Enterprise are innovating around these new requirements for IT as a service, consumption models, artificial intelligence, common management, regardless of the difference in disparate services being consumed, what do organizations need to think about to be innovative on their side of things, to be able to be in a better position to consume these services? That is to say, to get management as a service and hybrid cloud decision-making and mixture decisions as a service. What comes next when it comes to how the IT organization, the enterprise organization needs to shift? So what do you recommend people do to get ready for what, let's say, HPE is going to be coming out with in the next year or two?
Yeah, and this goes back really, I think, to the kind of overall hybrid story at a business level. If you think about really what's happening within almost every market or every industry, is we are moving from what used to be slow cycle business to standard cycle, or in a lot of cases, standard cycle business to really a fast cycle business. And even businesses that were traditionally slow cycle or standard cycle are accelerating. And it's really because of this underlying technology that is creating that. So we've always talked about every company is a technology company, and that is becoming more and more true, I think, every day. And as a result, it's driving business cycles faster and faster. So IT, in order to support those business cycles, has to move at that same speed. And where we see enterprises kind of pushing out, I don't hate to say pushing out, but kind of moving away from a traditional IT model, are those enterprises where IT cannot move at the speed the business is demanding. So we'll see IT, for example, still take 6 months to provide a platform when the business says, I need it in 20 minutes. So we'll see this split between kind of traditional IT and maybe a digital innovation group, or a digital group, as they're calling it within the enterprises, which is owned by the business unit as opposed to kind of core to IT. So businesses are responding to IT not being able to move fast enough and not being able to provide the responsiveness and the level of service by going out and looking outside and consuming services externally. So I think as we move forward, how can clients start to understand or start to move in this direction, at least from an HPE perspective, as we look at some of the services we've announced and we'll be rolling out in the next 6 to 12 months, it's really to help our clients get there faster, to provide that operational support, the management for hybrid, to take that burden away from IT, especially where they may not have the skill sets or capability, and be able to provide that seamless operating experience to our IT customers to allow them to go focus on those things that are going to accelerate their business that the business units are demanding. And I think to stay relevant, IT is going to have to do that. They're going to have to look for help and support so that they can start to move at that same speed and that same pace that businesses are demanding of them today. And I don't see that slowing down. I don't think anybody sees that slowing down. If anything, we see the pace continuing to accelerate. And when I talk talk about fast cycle, we're services or solutions we put into the market may have had a market shelf life of 2 to 3 years. We're seeing it compressed to maybe 6 months. It's amazing how fast competition comes in, even for doing innovative type of solutions that our customers are putting into the market. So IT has to accelerate at that speed as well. So if you look at our GreenLake hybrid cloud offering, really what we're trying to do is give our clients the ability to operate at that speed by providing that managed service capabilities across a hybrid estate, give them that common, consistent platform, and then allow them to innovate on top of it. So take away that management operation from their focus and let them really focus on what matters to the business today, which is that innovation.
All right. Now, we've looked at innovation as sort of a growing endeavor, from speeds and feeds all the way now up to high-level multi-enterprise procurement strategies. But for you personally, Erik, where do you get inspiration for innovation? How do you think out of the box when we can now see that that's really a necessary requirement?
One of the best parts about my job is the time I get to spend with our customers and really understanding what their challenges are, what they're doing. And one of the things we really look at is looking at adjacent industries, adjacent businesses, and trying to learn what is working, maybe what's working really well in retail, where's the innovation there, and what lessons learned can we apply? Because a lot of times, we're really seeing the industry shift so quickly that we don't have all the answers. We can't just take a kind of a product out approach any longer. We really have to start looking at the customers back in. And I think having that broad view and looking outside, I think it's really helping us. And it's where we're really getting a lot of our inspiration. For one good example is we're really focused on the overall experience that our clients have with HPE and really trying to drive a very consistent, very standardized, easy to use type of experience with us as a company. And it's interesting, as an engineering company with a lot of good development engineering capabilities, we tend to look at it from a product out view. Well, we'll build a portal that they can work within and we'll create better products and we'll get that out in front of the customer. And what we're learning is by looking outside, we're saying, wait a minute, what is it, for example, about Uber that everybody likes, right? It's not necessarily their app. Well, their app is good, but it's really about the clean car. It's about not having to pay when you leave, get out of the car, not have to fumble for a credit card. It's about seeing a map and knowing where the driver is. It's about a predictable cost where you know exactly what it's going to cost. And that experience, that overall experience, is what makes Uber Uber. And it's not just creating an app and saying, well, the app is the experience. So we are learning a lot from adjacent businesses, adjacent industries, and incorporating that into what we're doing. And I think it's just part of that as a service type of mentality where we really have to start thinking customer in. What is the experience that our customers are asking for? And how do we start building solutions that meet that experience requirement, not just the technical requirement? We're very good at that. But how do we start to meet that experience requirement? And this has been a real eye-opener for me personally. This has been a really a fun part of the job, is to really look to see what's the experience we're trying to create and how do we think differently about, rather than just producing products and putting them out into the market, how do we think about creating that experience first and then designing and creating the solutions that sit underneath it? So I think when you talk about sort of where we get inspiration, it's really about looking at those adjacencies. It's about understanding what's happening in the broader as a service or services market and really taking the best of what's happening and saying, how can we employ those types of techniques, those tricks, those lessons learned into what we are doing? And that's really driving, I think, a lot of our development and inspiration in terms of how we are innovating as a company within HPE.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how innovation is maturing around hybrid cloud models and operations, and we've learned how a proper management of hybrid cloud and hybrid IT from start to finish can make or break the realization of the promised benefits. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Erik Vogel, Global Vice President of Hybrid IT and Cloud at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Thank you so much, Erik.
Thank you.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this sponsored BriefingsDirect Voice of the Innovator Hybrid Cloud Strategies interview. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise-sponsored discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your IT community and do come back next time.